All right. We should be good. Good morning, everybody. Or I guess at this point, it'd be a good afternoon in like 2 minutes on the East Coast. So yeah, looks like we got about a minute. Let me just get the chat up on my phone so I can see you guys. Give me a second. GG ads. Okay, but we're good. So yeah, this is happening in about a minute. I really don't know what to expect. I know it's going to be mainly the hardware details, which I'll be honest, I'm not really tech savvy when it comes to CPU specs and whatnot. So I'll see if there's anything for me to get excited about, but you never know. This is not a live stream though. This is like pre-recorded, so hopefully they keep it pretty brief and snappy. Although it's pretty long from what I've seen. I think somebody said it's going to be about 50 minutes somewhere around there. So it should be a good breakdown of what to expect for PS5. I'm probably gonna get it either way. I've usually bought the Sony consoles at some point, but I'm probably gonna buy it when an actual game that I want comes out that's like exclusive or something. Like I didn't buy a PS4 until I saw that Bloodborne was out, and I think that was like a while after. Let's see if this is anything. Pretty much. Let me make sure it's caught up. Also, Vex, let me know immediately on audio, if you could please, when the stream starts. Because I might need to turn it up, but who knows. If it plays on PS2 games without making them look like ass, I'll get it fairly soon. Yeah, I mean, if backwards compatibility is, like, good, maybe that is something to consider. We'll see. Um, okay. About 2 more minutes. Actually, wow, that's harder than I expected. Let me put that down a little bit. Hopefully that's fine. Let me see. Audio sounds all good to go? Okay. Let me know if that's enough or if it gets, like, drowned out or anything. Or on my TV a little bit, actually. That's, like, still too loud on my end. But alrighty then. Huh. Just trying to think, though. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I just hope there is one thing that excites me about this. Coming from a non-tech savvy person, right? So, hopefully, they announce some features or something that like, gets me excited, or maybe some like comparisons from like game load times or something. I know there was some like leaked footage of like Spider-Man running on the PS5, so yeah, I want to see more visual stuff and less of the tech numbers, right? Like, I don't give a shit about the teraflops or whatever. I can't process that. I've never been like a spec savvy guy in that sense, so never really expecting anything in the way of games. Oh yeah, absolutely not. Not in the way of games. I just want something to get me excited in general for the PS5, Because this is it. It's kind of crazy though, because yeah, a lot of stuff's happening today. The Games Festival is back. This is happening, so I'm probably going to be messing with a lot of demos today after I see the list of games. Same thing with Trials of Mana. Like there's just a lot today because I guess GDC was supposed to happen. But they're moving stuff over.
We had to cancel the talk that we had planned for GDC, but we do have.
Let me know if I need to turn it up.
News about PS5.
Okay.
Who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny? Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jim. There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today, I want to talk a bit about the goals of the PlayStation 5 hardware and how
I'll only put it on full screen too.
Development of the console. I think you all know I'm a big believer in console generations. Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantial.
Then we'll make PS5 truly extend. Hey, what's up, Trion?
Learning by the game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that...
And Mark Cerny always has this, like, calm voice, almost like a therapist or something, right? He puts me at ease every time I see him on stage.
For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers, which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game.
Let's move in the tripod a little bit.
We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games, which is to say that game creators matter. Anything we can do to make life easier.
It's so weird how it's just like cutouts of people.
Help them realize their dreams, we will do. So,
oh wait, no, they're real. Bro, I thought it was fake.
I go to the various developers.
They're real.
Sit down and discuss
cardboard silhouettes real.
And what they'd like to see in future consoles.
My mind has been blown. Truly next gen.
Reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the
PS5 reveal ASMR.
That was an SSD.
God.
Which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk. It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console.
Man, you notice though how they keep showing PS1, 2, and 3 though, guys?
Here's what I had for those 3 consoles.
You notice how the PS4 is in there? I wonder if that means anything.
And it may take them 6
I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching. I'm probably reaching. But that just seems a little odd, right? Just a little bit. I don't know.
On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that
to
0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity.
Backwards compatible except PS4 would be a fucking twist. Holy shit.
With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU.
PS4 doesn't exist. We've been using the PS3 all this time.
Graphics performance over the last 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meeting.
I'm down with that.
Much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the
Can y'all make sure the PS4 settings menu doesn't lag like a motherfucker?
And it was the #1
I mean,
for PlayStation 5.
I could tolerate the PS4 more than I could PS3. That menu was garbage. God, like towards the end of having a PS3, that shit chugged. That was not great.
PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disk and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at
Good lord, it
2
looks like a
to
frickin'
50
puzzle.
milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much.
This is very computer.
Games are using
Yeah.
5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM.
This is stuff that goes a
Of course,
little over my head, but I
boot
get it.
times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that
It's more
differently,
simplified than
as a
previous
player,
explanations, I
wait
think,
for
when the
game to
PS4 was
boot,
revealed.
Wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would
Damn,
change?
instantaneous.
Now, SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't have seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second, pretty much at speed. As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about 1/4 of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's not bad compared to
Very
the previous.
100 times faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long
I mean, I'd
fast
love
travel is
that, but
taking,
man.
like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even
Yeah,
have
they're
to
probably
slow
gonna
down.
officially show that footage that was
Pretty cool,
going off
right?
before.
But for me, this is
Or at least that
not
was
the
leaked.
primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The
So it could load
primary
everything in
reason
Xenoblade
for
Chronicles 2 in like
fast
2
is
seconds.
that it gives
Yeah.
the game designer freedom.
God.
Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds like we did for Haven City when we were making Jak 2.
Oh,
the game
shit.
is 20 years old, but not much has changed.
I was not expecting this.
All
Okay.
those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second
That's
target was
bananas,
to
Lord.
eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway,
Yeah.
back to the hard.
That makes sense.
Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a
And I feel like I'm just like in a college
frequently
lecture
used
right
data
now
is
with Mark
included
Cerny.
in many chunks and
Not that I
therefore
mind
on the
though.
hard drive
He's got a good
many
voice for it.
times.
I feel like I'm
Marvel's
learning
Spider-Man
so
uses
much.
this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or two. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks, so no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated into them, which means no installs as you know them today.
That's wild.
There's yet one more benefit, which is that system memory can be used much more efficiently. On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard drive feels very
I remember all this an hour after it's done and immediately forget about it. True. You're not wrong.
Much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That means a lot of the 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting to potentially be used. A different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second.
The dream is Knack 3.
No load screens. Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs go away. The reality, though, is that the
How to reveal what the fuck?
just
How did I
one
hear
piece
this?
of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses
Well,
the data.
here's the thing. Who knows? I put it as hardware reveal because I didn't know like what to title it.
With 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive,
I feel like they're gonna reveal what it looks like finally. I feel like they'd have to.
PlayStation 5.
But it is kind of revealing the specs and whatnot. So in a way, it still is a reveal.
It was that game loads and streams.
Hey, what's up, Zigotan?
100 times faster.
You haven't
So
missed much.
every
TLDR, you know,
single
they're just kind of breaking down how
bottleneck
it's like faster to
and
load
there
games,
Are a lot of them.
and now they've
Let's look at
optimized
check-in and what happens when it's overhead
a lot of things from the
100
PS4.
times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined. A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD speeds we're talking about, that last part, moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the
Yikes.
iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts coming off the SSD. So to solve all of that, we built a lot of custom hardware, namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip. The flash controller in the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are 6 levels of priority when reading from the SSD. Priority is very important. You can imagine the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And while those textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller
God,
connects
it really is
to
interesting to
actual
just
flash
get all
drives
this
with
insight,
file
though.
storage. To reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8
Is this
channels
Sweeney?
The resulting bandwidth
Yes,
we
Mark
achieved
Sweeney.
is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 800.
The Trials of Mana demo. I still haven't played it yet.
Key question for us was,
I'm probably gonna do it
is
after
that
this.
enough? I mean, it's tempting
I gotta
to
set up
think
for
that
it though and
flash
everything,
certainly
but
doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our
I might do it
gaming
like a few
audience
minutes
to
after this and check it out
the
finally.
rest of what we put in the console. Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or redownloads would be quite low, and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment.
I hope it's not proprietary like Microsoft's doing, because that might be a bit rough for pricing.
4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe.
We'll see.
And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O. Before we talk about what that does, let's talk compression for a moment. PlayStation.
Yeah, but that's interesting though. So they didn't even get like a terabyte
we decided
for
to
it.
use it again on
I
PlayStation
guess to
5,
keep the costs low,
on
but
my
that's weird.
2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like zlib's smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled and built a custom decompressor into the I/O unit, one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression,
This is all
that
going over
typically
my head
costs
right
8
now.
or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself is capable of outputting as much
I've never
as
heard of this before.
22 gigabytes a second if the data happen to compress particularly well. By the way, in terms of performance, that custom decompressor equates to 9 of
All I
those
understand is a
gigabytes.
gigabyte.
That's
Yeah,
more
I'm like,
than
I've
it takes
never
to
heard of
decompress
Kraken
Kraken
decompression.
with the conventional
I'm like, bro, what?
There's a lot more in the
Maybe
custom
Shin
I/O,
knows.
including a dedicated DMA controller. The game can direct exactly where it wants to send the data coming off of the SSD. This equates to another Zen 2 core or two in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware around them. One of the coprocessors is dedicated to SSD I/O. This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too can become a bottleneck. There are coherency engines to assist the coprocessors. Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the SSD is read is an unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance. So we've implemented a gentler way of
Like
doing
us, sir.
where
Our is just saying like, nah,
coherency
that shit
engines
sucks.
inform
Get
the
rid of it.
GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd like to put it, and the whole process of loading it happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the dream. Thanks to all of that surrounding hardware, our 5.5 gigabyte
I understand some of what's being said, but for the most part,
100
yeah.
times faster I/O than PS4, and allow the dream of no load screens and super fast streaming to become a reality. Having said that, expandability of our SSD.
The thing is, thankfully, this is mainly for like the devs right now, since this was around like GDC time. But thankfully for us, you know, it's just like, oh, it's just gonna be faster. TLDR, right?
You're going to use it. If you have an extensive
Imagine if you had to buy a console and you had to actually worry about this stuff.
backwards compatibility
God, that'd be a nightmare.
games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive.
Frickin' consumer needs a degree before they can actually use the system.
PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though,
Phil Spencer
ideally
taking
you
notes
add
right now.
Your SSD storage. We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5. As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They
Okay.
connect through the custom I/O unit.
I mean, that's
like
good though. At
our
least the SSDs aren't like
so
proprietary.
they
You can
take
just
full
like
advantage of the
change it
GPU
out for another one if you
I/O
want potentially.
coprocessors and all the other features.
Although they're pretty expensive, but
Here's the
if you
catch,
want to,
though.
I guess.
That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other words, no PCIe 3.0.
Internet was down for like 8 minutes. Did I miss much? No, nothing too major. They were just kind of breaking down how compression and like what was being handled in the actual SSD and the GPU and all that. But nothing major.
By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said
Okay,
that,
good. So he at least
we
knows that there's going to be better
Apple's
ones out there and they'll be able to
that
support them.
commercial M2 drive will have its own
Which is good.
architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O unit has to arbitrate the extra priorities rather than the M2 drive's flash controller. And so the M2 drive needs a little extra speed to take care of issues arising from the different approach. That commercial drive also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives. Unlike internal hard drives, there's unfortunately no standard for the height of an M2 drive. And some M2 drives have giant heatsinks. In fact, some of them even have their own fans. Right now, we're getting M2 drive samples and benchmarking them in various ways. When
It looks like it might be a while till you can actually find like a better replacement for what they're going to put on the PS5 for the SSD.
To make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign.
Good to know the hurdles, although I'd probably never have money to throw around to just upgrade, you know, the SSD like that.
Which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked.
But the option is nice.
High in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but it's likely to be a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles. Balancing evolution and revolution is the second of them. This
Really
was
hope the
definitely
PS5's
a
fans will be
recurring
significantly quieter than my PS4's fans. Can only hope.
We need
Yeah.
GPU features and capabilities.
I can't speak
as
for
we have more performance,
vanilla
not really
PS4 anymore, but the
GPU
PS4 Pro that I have is actually
Of
pretty
course,
quiet.
Many of these capabilities
It never
result
bothered
in
me.
more
But my
performance.
laptop is louder than my
PlayStation 5
PS4 Pro.
teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just looking for the performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU that could not have been done before. And we need higher performance per watt. Every time we double the performance of some GPU component, we don't want to find out we've doubled the power consumed and the heat produced. But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were
My
new
PS4 Pro is loud as fuck.
features,
Yeah,
it would
there's
be
like a
optional
certain
for
model
features.
line that was
The
actually
GPU supports ray
pretty
tracing.
quiet, but I
You
forgot
don't
like the
have to
name of
use
it.
ray tracing to
But yeah,
use
some
the
of them
GPU.
more
The
louder.
GPU supports primitive features,
Like
but
more
you
of
can
the
release
early
your first
ones.
game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean? AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a
The way he
similar
smiled after he
discrete
says it.
GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CU count should be avoided as well. In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance are equal. It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact,
I don't even know what the significance in the numbers would be in the first place, but
is 62%
this is what happens. Can you imagine the contrast of like someone that's tech savvy watching this stream being like, "Oh yes, I completely agree," and I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't know what it is.
Backwards compatibility is to put the previous
I love being
chipset
lost.
in the new console, like we did with some PlayStation 3s, but that's of course extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips, meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3.
Makes sense.
Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis.
Yo, imagine if we play Bloodborne on PS5 and we finally get 60 frames. Or at least a solid 30. Could you imagine?
And we're expecting almost
oh man,
playable at launch on PlayStation 5. With regards to new features, as I said, our strategy was to try to break new ground, but at the same time not to require use of the new GPU capabilities. For more than a decade, GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of
I don't even know that
other
transition.
primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use
But it's not a
PlayStation
smooth
5
brain.
GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability. Using primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects.
Okay.
Another major
That don't
new
sound
feature
bad.
of our custom RDNA 2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs. The CUs contain a new specialized unit called the intersection engine, which can calculate the intersection of rays with boxes and triangles. To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in
Man, I still don't even have a... Like, you need a certain monitor for ray tracing, right? Or is it just for HDR? Because I don't even have a TV that supports HDR.
Then,
I'm like, damn, I probably can't even use that yet.
a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against
Smooth brain, normal brain, woke,
while the
jagged
intersection
graphical
engine
brain.
is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, The ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5, but it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take less than 1 million rays a second to have
All we
big
want is
impact on
Skate
audio.
4.
That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations.
I mean, that's
With
the thing
a
too.
bit
Definitely
more
don't
of the
expect any
GPU
game
invested in
announcements
ray tracing,
on
It
this.
should be possible to do some very nice global illumination. Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could
I'm
easily
hoping
take
for at least a
hundreds of
reveal
millions
of the
rays a
console,
second,
but
and full ray tracing could
who
do
knows?
wonders.
They might be
How
coy
far
and
can we go?
save it for, like,
I'm
you know,
starting to get quite
when they
bullish. I've
reveal some
already
launch
seen
games and something in
PlayStation
like a
5
separate event.
pilots successfully using ray tracing based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's 2 possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously.
Somebody's
If you
going
just
to.
calculate teraflops, you get the same number.
They'll probably
But
save that for
actually,
E3. Oh
performance
wait,
is
so yeah.
noticeably different because teraflops is
Boy.
the computational capability of the vector.
Is unfortunate.
That's just one part of the GPU. There are a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth, and so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is,
At least they're being
our
honest.
process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutiae of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process in previous consoles
Interesting.
has been to try to guess what the
I didn't know
maximum
that's,
power consumption
that was
during
the issue.
entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly.
Be
PlayStation
careful
5
about
is
buying this thing on
especially
launch.
challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that
Oh
consume a
boy,
lot of power.
I hope they get it
These are
right.
great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for
No idea, Zigoten.
instruction
On
usage,
PlayStation
we need to
Experience.
set the CPU clock substantially lower, or
I
notice
can't just not buy it. I mean, I'll probably wait till there's a
So,
an exclusive I
after
want,
much discussion,
unless
we
it
decided to go
really
with a
changes
very
PS4
different
games I
approach
might
on
consider.
PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with
But I'll see.
36 CUs.
I just,
Mind
I'm
you,
wary about
RDNA 2
buying
CUs are large,
consoles at
each
launch,
have
especially
62%
PS4
more
still had a
transistors
weird
than
launch
CUs
too.
we were using on PlayStation
So
4. So if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops. And we expect
that is a number of teraflops.
At or close to that frequency and performance. Similarly,
I don't even know what it means.
3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about finding new dreams. It's important for us on the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us to a focus on 3D audio. As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller.
I was going to say, I might be able to understand this part.
Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio
100% though.
project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So, it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4. Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral.
Okay.
The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want
Yeah, because I'm
developers
wondering
to
with
have
like
to pick and
people's
choose
like
what
really
sound
terrible
would get
like
3D effects and which
HDTV
wouldn't. We
speakers
wanted
that are
every
just
sound in the game to have
they're the first thing to
dimension.
go when you buy a new TV.
And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve. The idea was that if we stopped
Transition,
using just
though.
a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like music in a game does. The
I mean, I'm
concept of
super down for
locality
this. I
is
just hope it
simple.
works really
It's just
well.
your sense of where the audio is coming from, to the right of you, behind you, above you. This can immerse you further in the game, and it can also directly enhance the gameplay. To use Dead Space as an example, I know,
Oh.
old school. You're fighting enemies
Okay.
in very dark, spooky locations. Back in the day, if you played the game using the TV speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to
Overly
tell
sensitive
quite
to the
where that
audio.
enemy was.
Turned by 10 degrees, you don't hear
With
anything in your right
headphones,
ear
you could tell
anymore.
that the
Yeah.
enemy was somewhere
I
on
just
the
hope it's
right,
good.
which let you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and you take it out. So, how do we know where a sound is coming from in the first place? Well, all those bumps and folds in the ear have a meaning, evolutionarily speaking. Based on what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside the ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal. These volume changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes, based on direction and frequency, can be encoded in a table called the Head-Related Transfer Function, or HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency. The horizontal axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. HRTF is as
Interesting.
unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals. And
That's
then
wild. They're
sit the subject
serious.
down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations.
Wow.
Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive. The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample. Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's
Good
multiple
lord,
fast
that's
Fourier
insane.
transforms needed for
Like,
every
this
sound
much
source
work
every
for
audio
this.
deck. That's a lot of multiplies. This computational complexity
I thought that was all toilet paper.
meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom
Oh
hardware
my god, Shreyan, I don't even.
Collectively, we're referring to the hardware unit and the proprietary algorithms we run on it as Tempest 3D Audio Tech. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our goals with audio. It suggests a certain intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the Tempest engine. It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So the Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU. All data access is via DMA, just like an SPU. Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be more efficient than our GPU, thanks to the SPU-like architecture. The goal being to make possible near 100% utilization of the CU's vector units. Where we ended up is a unit with roughly the same SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined. If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for something like 5,000 sound sources. But of course, we want to use more complex algorithms, and we don't need
God, that's nuts.
that number of sounds.
I think this is an actual audience.
If a simpler strategy, such as using
I mean, people are moving.
peripherals, could have achieved our
But
goals,
who
we
knows?
wanted
Maybe it's an
3D
elaborate
audio
green
for all,
screen.
not just those with licensed sound.
It really
bars
makes you
well.
think.
Also, we wanted many hundreds of sound sources, not just the 32 that Atmos supports. And finally, we wanted to be able to...
It's funny though, earlier in the stream I thought it was
overwhelming
just
amount
like
of processing power
still
as well. And it
silhouettes
wasn't
that
clear
didn't
what
even
any
move.
peripheral might have.
But this might just be a green screen.
In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive or need high bandwidth. But the primary purpose of the Tempest engine remains 3D audio. Now, 3D audio is a major academic research topic. It's
Man, can you imagine Monster Hunter World with that 3D audio? Because I know they have something similar in-game. But holy shit, I'm just imagining the next Monster Hunter on the PS5.
Immense.
It's probably going to be a fucking amazing experience playing that game.
Before,
Oh
I
my
talked
God,
about making a
my
sound
head's
source
spinning.
appear as if it's coming
That'd be so
for
dope.
one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities. The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000 HRTF sample locations, so we have to blend the HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the
Good
spherical
Lord.
harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches. That's a lot of variations. It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year, step-by-step process. Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development and implementation are more straightforward.
Makes sense, but I'm definitely not playing with that.
For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV, then the sound can be made to feel as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound.
Yeah, now that's nuts. I would never have a surround sound system. I just got a sound bar, but that's it. But I'm like,
allows you to toggle between
I really can't play with headphones just because then, like, if there's ever anything going on in the house, I can't hear anything when I use them.
Pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow.
Which for most people that's not a problem, but it does kind of make you lose a bit of awareness when you're playing.
Feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the matrix? Does my brain believe I'm really there, like I was talking about earlier when I explained our target of presence? Well, the answer is no, but you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine, it was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest fit to the total game-playing audience. This shows a piece of the default HRTF on the left and my HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great. When I use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using headphones and my HRTF, I occasionally get fooled and even think a sound is coming from the real world when it's actually coming from
Oh boy, I can't wait. Can you imagine horror games with that shit?
Is that there are
Oh man, that's gonna fuck with you.
Sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice of 5 HRTFs. There's a simple test where you pick the one that gives you the best locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended.
I mean, that's not bad, though. At least you have a few options.
Maybe you'll be sending us a photo of your ear, and we'll choose a neural network to pick the closest
What the
HRTF
heck?
in our library. Maybe you'll be sending us a video of your ears and your head, and we'll make a 3D model of them and synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play an audio game to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play and home in on the HRTF that gives you the highest
That'd be kind of
score,
wild.
meaning that it matches you the best. This is a
Sorry,
journey
not
we'll
Sweeney.
all be taking
Yeah, that's why I
together
was joking
over the
about
next
it.
few years, ultimately
Mark
committing
Sweeney.
to enabling everyone to experience that next level of realism. Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate a bit about our design and decision-making process today and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD, or something else? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you for your time today.
Man, and that's it. That's it. Oh, man. Well, that's, okay. That's about what I expected. I really would have thought, let me close off that autoplay. I really would have thought, they were gonna at least show off, like, a comparison. I don't know how toxic that chat is. It might be it might be cursed. But good lord. So yeah. That's I don't know. Like, it works. It works, but man. And that's let me see. Great technology, let me see. Makes sense, it was just for devs. Yeah. It's just that I thought there was gonna be like in-engine comparisons. Like, you know, like a PS4 game running on a, you know, PS4 Pro versus like PS5 or something, like show it off. Let's see. It's a device that is like a full ring shaped speaker that's 360 degrees around your head. Reckon that could be really immersive and precise if you design your audio around that device. Maybe, but it's probably extremely expensive. It definitely wouldn't be for us. But there might be. But yeah, overall, it was pretty alright. It's definitely a thing where, like, I feel like more of the tech savvy people, you know, are gonna be like comparing the Xbox specs to PS5 and seeing if it's quote unquote better or not. So, you know, it's not bad. I'm glad I streamed it just so we could, you know, at least like talk and chat as opposed to just watching this and being completely lost on our own. But yeah, it's kind of what I expected. I thought they were just going to show a little more visual comparison to like show it off. But yeah, I had a feeling they weren't going to show any new games, obviously. And I know they were going to probably like do the unveiling and stuff proper, because I think that's happened with the PS4 when they unveiled it. They directly showed off like the new features and you know, maybe some new games. They showed off like the controller too and whatnot. So that'll probably happen later this year. But it was all right. So far, it was largely promising. Yeah, it doesn't sound bad. It seems like they actually are aware of the faults that the PS4 had, and you know, working to improve that. I'm especially excited for the audio. Obviously, that's probably the biggest one for me because while I don't know much about the CPU and GPU specs, I think a lot of people can understand more immersive audio in general, right? Because the PS3, he's actually right about that. It actually did have better audio, which was kind of weird. Where I did notice that where like the PS4, it didn't seem like as impressive, which it definitely felt like a step back in some way. So I was like, yeah, that is kind of weird. But I'm glad they acknowledged that too, and they're trying to go backwards on that and make it better. So I'm super down for that. Please give me PS1 to 3 backwards compatibility. Beg of you. Get excited when they show games running on it. Yeah, pretty much. I'm like, it's cool, but I ain't hype yet. You know, this isn't the one to get me hype, and I was expecting that. I wasn't expecting, you know, them to just blow the lid here. I think the next event's gonna do it. Whenever they stream that, who knows when or where now that E3 is canceled. But it's probably gonna be something around June, because I know they're gonna plan something around it, even with E3 being canceled. So probably around that month, we'll see more details. But yeah, let me see. I'd pay 100 extra, not even kidding. I mean, I would too. I can't imagine how complicated it would be, but man, if it was backwards compatible with all those consoles, I probably would pay more. That's just me though. Let's let me see. Anything else I missed? If it was like a bonus model, I could deal with that too. Yeah, like maybe like, you know, have an option. Would be kind of cool. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Looking at the time, it's like 1 p.m. I'm not sure what to do first. Because long story short, today's really weird. Because Jeff Keighley announced yesterday, and I completely missed it because I was streaming, that the Games Festival should be live, like now in like a minute. It should be up on Steam. And for those who don't know what that is, back a few months ago when the Game Awards were happening, he had this thing called the Game Festival, which basically lets you try out demos for games that aren't released yet. So essentially, it's his way right now. It's his way of showing off the games that were going to be at GDC and like showing off. But people can actually play it. Like you could download the Steam demo and check it out. So I might see what's in the list of games and see what I might mess with. Of course, there's the Trials of Mana demo separate from that I want to check out. But it's weird. It might be a day filled with tons of demos. You know, so I'm not sure what's going to happen. I just got to look at the list of games and see what I'm going to do. Obviously, if I have any more time, I'll do Trails from Zero again, but today's a weird one. Today's a weird day. But yeah, I'll let you guys know when that happens. Probably in about an hour, I'd say. Yeah, in an hour I'll probably stream something, or an hour or half an hour actually. Yeah, let's make it half an hour. Because I already 8 in the morning, so I'm good. But I'll probably stream something in like half an hour. But yeah, overall presentation was pretty alright as far as like, expectations go. Watch some people be like really dumb as hell on Twitter, just saying like, "Oh man, they didn't show off any games." I'm like, where were you? This is supposed to happen around GDC, so this is pretty much what I expected. But yeah, either way. Either presentation, a question mark out of 10. Yeah, I mean, for my expectations, it's like a 7 or an 8, right? It showed off mostly what, you know, the texts were in the specs, so that's kind of what they even said going in. It's not like they misled anybody, right? So you can't really knock it for being exactly what it was. So yeah, I'm gonna head out. I'll come back in about half an hour ish. You guys just, you know, take a break, take it easy. And I'll be back. Oh, I will say though, it might be more than half an hour. If I consider doing the Steam demos first, because that might take a bit of troubleshooting and like checking if it's, you know, runs good on my laptop. Because that's the thing too. I don't really got a proper rig, so I'm gonna see if it can handle this freaking toaster. Granted, it's not that bad. Like the laptop is decent for running games, but I'd imagine some of the higher end game demos I won't be able to play at all, so it might take more than half an hour if I decide to do the Steam Game Festival first. But we'll see. I'll let you guys know. I'll keep you posted on Twitter. Either way, I will be live soon, so yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm gonna stop rambling. Y'all have a good one, and the day is just getting started, but I'll see you later. We out.